2024 HRA Board meeting. First item is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion passes. Oh, motion made by Wooten and seconded by Doblinger. Carter, I'll get this. My brain doesn't work that fast. Okay. Item number 3, approval of the minutes of, first item is the October 8th, 2024 board meeting minutes. Are there any edits or changes? If none, may I have a motion to approve the October 8th, 2024 HRA board meeting minutes?
So moved. Second.
So, motion made by Mua, second by Doblinger. Any discussion? No, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes with 7-0. All right. Item 3.2 is the approval of the October. I'm sorry, 6-0. Sorry.
Thank you. I was just like, wait a minute, I know someone's absent. I can
So, item 3.2 is approval of the October 22nd, 2024 board meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second, okay. Motion made by Wooten, second by Issei. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 7-0. What did I forget? 6. And I even wrote 6. You're going to fire me. All right, moving on. Organizational business. Item 4.1, move to approve the final special benefit levy pursuant to Minnesota statute section 649.033 subdivision 6, and motion to approve final budget for 2025 for the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in and for the city of Bloomington. May I have the staff report?
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. I will be going through the report this evening. So first, I'd like to highlight the mission, which is to create a stable and inclusive community through safe and dignified housing choices. This is a mission that staff and Commissioners created together earlier this year at a retreat. And it covers a lot of the 5 different areas where we really focus activities and operations, which you can see here on the slide. Operations, housing stability, home ownership pathways, housing creation, and housing preservation. The 2025 proposed revenue, you can see here, is just over $10 million. Of that, $1,965,356 is the HRA levy request. About $7 million of that is federal grants. That is for our voucher program, the HCV program, as well as CDBG funds. And then we have some additional income from fees and rent payments, et cetera. You can see from this breakdown that about 70% of the HRA budget is actually through allocated federal funding. And here is a little bit more of a detailed breakdown on the different services. Of course, operations, administration overarch all. And then we have 2 distinct teams within the HRA. One is housing stability and home ownership. The other is residential development and services. Housing stability and home ownership focuses, they manage the voucher program as well as the management of the various properties that are owned by the HRA, whereas the residential development and services team administers loans through the CDBG program, as well as some funding through our neighborhood fund, and various larger development projects. And you can see funding compliance and grant management, of course, runs through all that we do. Okay, and here is the breakdown of the budget request. You'll note between 2023 and 2024, there was the shift in the responsibilities of the HRA and the port, which is why you see such a significant change in budget. And revenues and expenditures, of course, matched each other. So they both decreased in an equal amount so that we had a balanced budget for 2024. I'll call your attention to a couple things in the revenue space. The property tax is essentially the levy, and the intergovernmental category, that is that approximately $7 million that funds our voucher and CDBG programs. And then in the expenditure categories, of course, you can see the staffing budget, which has steadily increased over the past several years. And then the materials, supplies, and services section, this covers almost everything we do. So the loan payments, the voucher payments, etc., everything is covered in that category. And you can see here the total 2025 proposed budget, which is that $10,339,341. And here is a slide to show the history of the HRA levy. So you can see again that split between Port and HRA is reflected in the 2023 levy amount, where in order to keep the levy static for taxpayers, the levy was split between Port and HRA staff. That's why the drop down to 2024, and then the slight increase for 2025. I will note that in kind of going through the budget planning, we do anticipate some more significant needs in the future and would likely be anticipating asking for a higher levy increase in future years. And that's to fund various things. Capital planning, for one thing, the management of the HRA-owned properties, also staffing to support strategic work and implement our programming. And then also we want to build a reserve or have funding available to support some of these larger strategic projects and investments to support housing across the city. And then here I'll just highlight where that levy increase, the increase this year was $300,000. So I'll highlight some of the areas where that increase is captured. We have Inspire is a HUD inspection program for our HCV program, so that the standards are changing, which results in some budgetary needs around training and implementation and things like that. We also have some funding going towards strategic partnerships. So the big one there is the Bloomington Affordable Homeownership Program, which is, you all know, a very significant grant from Minnesota Housing and is a big focus of HRA work over the next few years. So we have some budget in here to support that. We also are implementing a new program for tracking our loans, which will help with just clarifying and streamlining processes and long-term tracking. And then we also have needed, with all of these strategic projects and various agreement reviews, some increased legal assistance needs in the coming year. So that's captured here as well. And then finally, of course, staffing, which you know is a really significant portion of the budget as well. There were 4 new positions added in 2024, and our goal would be to extend those and maintain those into 2025. Okay, and here is a breakdown a little bit more specifically into our budgeted expenditures. You can see again how much of a significant portion the vouchers and CDBG programs make up. I'll also call your attention to that 5% for Opportunity Housing or the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That is going towards the debt service to pay the loan that the HRA took in order to support those opportunity housing projects. And then there's funding as well for general fund, development fund, and of course going towards upkeep and maintenance of our HRA-owned properties. And then here, more specifically, since the levy is such a smaller, relatively smaller portion of the total HRA budget, this is a breakdown of those dollars specifically. Again, you can see the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Opportunity Housing is a significant chunk of that, as well as general administration. And then maintenance of the properties again, some various loan programs through the Neighborhood Fund that funds both our HELP loans, which is a partnership with our environmental staff, and some additional funding for the larger home improvement loan program. And then the development fund is a discretionary fund that the HRA can use for some of these larger strategic projects. And speaking of the development fund, I thought it would be helpful to give you just a quick snapshot of some of the investments that the HRA has made out of this fund over the past year or two. So various single-family home development projects. Most recently, that was 9030/9036 Park. And then there's also 4 lots known as the Ralph lots, which are an acquisition from MnDOT. And those are also a partnership with Habitat for Humanity that's moving forward, supported by grant fund from the council with a match from the city. So that's the approximately $500,000 in commitment that you see there. The Bloomington Affordable Home Ownership also has a pretty significant investment for multiple purposes. One, to support strategic partnerships and advancement of that work. And also, because it's a reimbursement grant, we expect some of that funding to be needed to advance for these programs and projects going forth, and then to get some of that reimbursed through the grant. And then we have the Heights loan, which the HRA just discussed last week. So that's a total $2.5 million project, with $1 million coming from bonding through the city and the rest coming from the development fund. The HRA-owned property investments that we just approved recently, which was more significant improvements to the properties this year. And then, of course, the opportunity housing investments, which are the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that I mentioned already. And so the remaining uncommitted balance in this account is $2.7 million. And so while I would say it's a healthy balance, especially because these funds are not yet expent, they're just committed, we also know that $2.7 million, with development projects, that can be, that doesn't necessarily go very far with these large projects. So we would want to continue to support that fund and make sure through the levy that we're continuing to fund these projects. The other thing I'll just note about this is that there is cash flow kind of coming in and out of the account, which is why a lot of these numbers are approximate. It's a high-level estimate. It's just kind of money kind of flows in and out on a regular basis. And then I also wanted to mention some strategic investments from the Neighborhood Fund. So some of these are not necessarily all from the Neighborhood Fund. I called attention to a couple of those with some points here, but the Rehab Loan Program, that's the Home Improvement Loan Program, which has loans for various home improvement needs. That's a very needed and popular program. The HELP loans are very small loans for emergency services, and that's the partnership with our environmental staff. I believe that's a new program just this year, or perhaps it was approved in 2023, that has also seen demand. And then we also have various strategic partnerships that are funded, some through the general fund and some through the neighborhood fund. PPL has a contract to provide some homebuyer education services, and then we also have various agreements with other local organizations that support the mission of the HRA so that we can continue to support and further their work. And this fund does not carry a balance. The revenues match the expenditures annually. And then last, we'll get to this timeline of action steps. So the grayed out ones have already gone through, and then tonight we have the meeting, which is to approve the final budget and recommend the final levy. The city council decision is scheduled for December 2nd. I believe that usually goes on consent for city council, which is that they would accept the budget and approve the final levy, and then that levy would be submitted to the county for informational and levy purposes. Which brings us to the suggested motion, and happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Any questions? Commissioner Carter?
Thank you, Chair. So question around the 4 positions that were hired this year to build out the residential and services team, primarily for the development work. Are these primarily grant funded, or were they needed to help facilitate a lot of that incoming money? Because we have received quite a bit of money recently through the state. I'm just I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of budgets floating around in my head right now.
Yes.
So I'm trying to remember.
Understood.
kind of the rationale for these.
Yeah, Chair and Commissioners. So not all of the positions were in RDS. 3 of them were, and they were really to support additional capacity. So the salaries in general, they're split between different funds. So they're not all funded out of like the general fund. So for example, the RDS team administers CDBG. So a portion of this would go towards time that they spend working on CDBG, as well as various other projects. But a large portion of these positions were to support some of those strategic initiatives and the staffing that was needed to administer both the programs and those initiatives. And a large portion of these are funded through the general fund.
Okay. And then I am not meaning for this question to be like partisan at all, but with the election results, I guess I'm just curious, and you don't have to answer now, but I'd be curious if staff are predicting any changes in funding for 2025. I don't know if it would happen that quickly. I mean, obviously different administrations have different priorities and some deprioritize things. And so I guess I'm just curious if you have heard any kind of predictions as to what might happen with HUD and the funding that flows through HUD to local communities.
Chair and Commissioners, good question. While I don't know, I can say I believe when this administration was in place previously, there weren't necessarily dramatic reductions to funding for these programs like the vouchers and CDBG, but there were some administrative changes and possibly some implementation of new policies that were put on hold. So we are keeping an eye. I mean, and any change in federal administration affects these federal programs. So we are, of course, keeping an eye on announcements, as always, just to be aware of any upcoming changes.
Yeah. And that's helpful to note that the last time there weren't significant reductions in the dollar amounts. It was more of the administrative changes. So thank you.
Other questions? I didn't know if you were getting ready to speak. No. Okay. So may I have a motion to approve the final special benefit levy pursuant to Minnesota statute section 469.033 subdivision 6 and motion to approve final budget for 2025 for the Housing and Redevelopment Authority in and for the city of Bloomington?
Move to approve.
Okay, apparently we need to do a separate vote on these 2 items. So first is the move to approve the final special benefit levy.
Move to approve.
Okay, vote and approve.
Second.
Second by Doblinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Now, may I have a motion to approve the final budget for the 2025 HRA Authority in and for the city of Bloomington?
Move to approve.
Motion by Wooten to approve.
Second.
Second by Doblinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. All right. Next item is new business. A motion approving resolution 2024, approving subordination, Aeon, I think, is for Cedar Gate, Cedar Glen, and Metropolitan Towers. May I have the staff report, please?
Chair and Commissioners, thank you. So the item tonight is about some HRA loans that were issued back in 2017. And I'll give you some background on that and some background on Aeon as well. Aeon is a nonprofit affordable housing developer and housing preservation organization. So since 1986, Aeon has built, purchased, or renovated more than 5,900 apartments and townhomes. and they've done a lot of work here in Bloomington. So back in 2017, Aeon acquired a portfolio of naturally occurring affordable housing, 10 properties in total, with 6 of those properties being within Bloomington. And during that acquisition process, Aeon came to the HRA for the city of Bloomington and made a request for some subsidy to support rehabilitation efforts for those newly acquired units. The request was for $12,500 per property for each of the 6 properties, and the HRA agreed to that request and put subordinate loans in place on each one of those 6 properties, and was able to also record restrictive covenants on those properties to have an affordability term in place that coincides with the loans from the HRA. And so this year, Aeon approached HRA staff with a request around refinancing of 3 of the Bloomington properties. They have some of their financing coming to term. They're looking to refinance their primary mortgage. And because our HRA loans are subordinate to that primary mortgage, we will need to resubordinate if we want to keep that loan in place. So the 3 properties that are getting refinanced are Cedar Glen, Cedar Gate, and Metropolitan Towers. You can see they're all kind of clustered in the same area. The other 3 properties, Nicollet Court, Masada Manors, and I'm blanking on the last name, I'm going to cheat. The Arbors Apartments are farther west and south. They're around 90th and Nicollet, close to Oxborough Lake. But the 3 properties that they've asked to refinance this year are Cedar Gate, Cedar Glen, and Metropolitan Towers. So as I mentioned, for us to keep our second mortgages in place, we would need to resubordinate to the new first mortgages after that refinance, or as a part of that refinancing process. No significant changes would occur to our existing agreements. And if we choose to resubordinate, it will ensure that those restrictive covenants that I mentioned will not be terminated. And having those covenants in place give us security that the affordability terms that we negotiated will persist until either the end of our loan term, which would be 2047, or if Aeon chooses to voluntarily repay the mortgage, then that covenant would terminate. So that is the request from Aeon, is to get approval for the resubordination of those 3 mortgages with the HRA. Each one is $12,500, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Commissioner Mua?
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm, essentially, resubordination, just make sure that we continue to maintain the language that we had. Nothing else really changes. It just allows them to refinance and move forward with what they need to do.
Chair and Commissioners, yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
And then each loan is only $12,500, so they could probably pay that whenever they want. They're choosing not to, because I know Aeon is a pretty respected nonprofit operating these kind of housing options, and so you said if they repay everything, then they could remove that language. Is that correct?
Chair and Commissioners, if they repay the loan, then that would be an event of allowing termination of those restrictive covenants. But as you said, Aeon is mission-based to preserve affordable housing. I don't foresee that necessarily resulting in the affordability being lost. But what it could result in is if they were to make a sale of those properties to like a market rate renter, property manager, then we wouldn't have that security in place. Now, it's possible that that security would expire in a sale anyway. So
Sure.
Really the subordination just ensures that the existing agreements persist.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so hearing none, may I have a motion to approve Resolution 2024 fill in the blank?
23. That's number
20 what?
23.
23, okay. Approving subordination agreements and authorizing related actions to subordinate HRA loans with Aeon for Cedar Gate, Cedar Glen, and Metropolitan Towers.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mua, second by Issei. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. The next item is a discussion item, and it's a study item about the missing middle housing in Bloomington. And may I have the staff report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mueller and members of the HRA Board. Good to be back with you. I think I've presented in front of most of you before. Nick Johnson, Planning Supervisor. I lead the Long Range Planning Unit at City of Bloomington. So good to get some discussion about some of these land use and zoning code policies that interact with housing, of course. So today's topic, missing middle housing. It's a topic that's gotten a lot of attention in planning and development circles, land use circles. So good to bring it before you and have a discussion. So what is it? Why do we need it as a community? What are some of the opportunities within Bloomington's existing zoning code to make it easier to create this type of housing? And then what are opportunities to create new uses and standards to diversify Bloomington's housing stock to provide more opportunities for Bloomington residents? And of course, I certainly can take questions at the end, at the chair's prerogative. You certainly can stop me in the middle as well. I don't mind either approach. So what is missing middle housing? So missing middle housing is, there's many different individual types of what we consider missing middle housing, and they were very common amongst American cities and cities elsewhere prior to the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And we can talk about what the reasons why that restricted their development after that, but generally speaking, they range from all the way to include ADUs, all the way up to development types that can include 20 units. They're specifically designed to blend in and be compatible with lower density residential uses. So think of all of Bloomington single family neighborhoods. Many of these housing types can blend right in into the fabric of these neighborhoods and do so very effectively. Most forms of missing middle housing development in the United States is in that 2 to 4 unit range. So duplexes, we call them two-family homes in the zoning code. Triplexes, quads, fourplexes, multi-unit, multiplex rather, they have different names. So one of the things I would encourage just as part of this discussion, there's a lot of different types, and we're coming before you to ask what types should we establish in our code. But really what I want to emphasize that it's important just to be flexible and not get too caught up or fixated on each individual type and how one's different from the other. What we want to try and create a landscape of is a system that can allow different outcomes and more variety than what we have today, in effect. So why did this housing become difficult to build? Starting in the 1920s, but particularly in 1940s and 50s, rapid suburbanization of the United States, zoning codes and land use regulations became much more restrictive and prohibitive of these housing types. Most housing production in the United States since then has been in the form of single-family homes or in multifamily, with less in between. Townhome development certainly popular in many areas, but really that's kind of like the only consistent form of middle housing or medium density you might hear it referred to as post-World War II. And so this graphic on the slide before you just presents different types of missing middle housing. Some are more common in other parts of the country than in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we certainly have some of these types. Some of them are more less winter friendly than others, but all of them, I think, offer different benefits and different attributes that are positive. So why do we need missing middle housing? I'm going to talk about that just on a few slides. So the graph on the left expresses numerically how in the United States we're not creating starter homes in the form of new construction anymore. So starter home in this case is defined as 1,400 square feet or less. This is a type of dwelling or housing unit that has been in great decline in terms of new construction, new production. And so missing middle housing is viewed as one of the potential solutions to fill in that gap, because these housing types do tend to have smaller unit sizes and, as I said, can be integrated into lower density areas. The graph on the right, this is national data, but talks about 2 to 4 unit production stemming from 1990 up until 2022. So certainly some increases in various years post 2010, but that's really more the I would say, compared to the historic data, a significant drop off, and then more the aberration than the norm to have less 2 to 4 dwelling unit production. So one of the essential elements of missing middle housing, and it's tied to not necessarily all new construction. As you know, new construction tends to be fairly expensive unless it's income restricted in some way. But overall, I think one of the key concepts of this topic is just that we need to build more housing overall in all the different income bands that people can afford. It's just going to create a healthier ecosystem overall. If you add more supply, people are going to have more options to swap their housing option if they are an existing resident for other things. The other thing I would say too is, and affordability is critically important. And I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I just wanted to point out on this slide that in the Twin Cities region, we have a deficit of 79,000 housing units for extremely low income. This is of the most recent census data that Michelle Lincoln pulled together. So just being cognizant of that number and how overall housing production can hopefully move that trend line in a different direction than where it's currently moving. The other thing I wanted to mention about missing middle housing, well, you know what, I'm going to do that at the end. Forgive me, I got some more slides to get here. So this is kind of same topic, but boiling it or directing it to the Bloomington context. Housing cost burden, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that concept. But and if you're not, let me know. But basically, 20% of Bloomington's residents who live in owner-occupied housing are housing cost burden, and just under 50% of Bloomington's renters are housing cost burden. So they're paying more than, I guess, what is a stable amount for their housing cost, and that creates other challenges, of course. So just to boil that down to the Bloomington piece. And then this is the most recent data from our assessing and division. We're very lucky to have assessing in-house. A lot of other cities have to work with their county or other professionals to get this data as quickly and as routinely as we do. But just to note that the median value of a single-family home, and again, all this ties together on the topic of affordability, but the median value of a home in Bloomington is $356,000. Median sales price I'm sorry, that was the assessed value. The sales price was $387,000. Just before I stepped up here, I looked up at the Met Council affordability limits for owner-occupied housing, and it's $290,000 for 80% AMI, I believe, for 2024. So you can see based on that median sales price, you look at $90,000 over the what is currently deemed affordable at 80% AMI in the region. So it's just it's a consistent challenge with respect to that. And then the average rent, I think some of this information may have been presented to you in the annual housing report and other sources, but we have some of that data as well. The one point that I couldn't wait apparently to try and get to, which I kept stepping on my tongue, was that one of the key attributes of missing middle housing is that it also offers an opportunity for greater housing variety in communities. So as I mentioned, most communities are building either single-family homes or multifamily. Sometimes townhomes is kind of the main medium density product that's being created, and that's of course more in greenfield type communities. Where they have land available for development. Bloomington is fully built out. We need to find ways to increase our housing supply in low-density areas. And so missing middle housing does offer more opportunities to build housing that's ADA accessible, that's good for seniors, that's good for 1- and 2-person households. All of these things are going to increase in our proportional share of our residents. So this housing type, and talking about the regulations of what potentially prohibits it or blocks it from being created, is very essential. Bloomington's the 4th oldest community in the Twin Cities region, I believe. And so we are an older community, and I believe since 1990 the number of households with children has gone down slightly as well. So this is missing. This is housing production in single family, ADUs, two family, and 3 to 4 unit dwellings since 2017. This is kind of a good data, a strong data set we have from our most current permitting system. That's how we know it's very accurate. We could look at previous eras, but it's a little bit less quality control on the data accuracy standpoint. So what I see here is there's not been a significant amount of production of ADUs. Two-family dwellings, we've had a little bit of success constructing a few in infill sites, but not as much as we'd like. And no 3 to 4 unit dwellings in this period of time. Now, and key to know that the zoning code currently considers a 3-unit development multifamily. Currently, we don't have a separate triplex or separate uses in our code. We do have townhomes, and so that's one avenue potentially to get a 3 or 4 unit development in one spot. But most people are looking to develop that or looking to create more scale or more number of units than just that. So missing middle is really the avenue to get at some of these things. I would note that I believe, a few years ago, Mike Palermo was before you conducting joint meetings with the Planning Commission about some of our single and two-family zoning amendments. Those did get adopted in May of 2023. We have been keeping an eye on single and two-family unit production since then. One of the significant challenges is right as, and you're all more attuned to this than most, is that right when that rolled out, as we kind of entering the most difficult construction environment, just in terms of labor, cost of land, as well as cost of borrowing. So finance rates are very high. It's very difficult to build these types of projects because, frankly, they just have less revenue on the back end of them than multifamily or other projects. So, that's certainly one way, and the Planning Commission talked about this a little bit at their discussion. One way to, or a important role and discussion for the HRA to have is kind of what role it plays in, the support of developer community, just in terms of training them, educating them. Resources are a piece of that too, but emerging developers, that's a key thing to think about with this topic too, whether it be educational workshops or trainings. I know ULI and other places do things like that. It's something that your staff is keyed into as well. But one of the issues is just there's not a large roster of developers who do this work. And again, that's related to the revenue piece. I will say that I do know of a couple two-family dwellings that are kind of in the works, that are getting closer to the finish line. So I am, despite what these numbers look like right now, post-2023 with related to those zoning amendments, I am optimistic that some more projects are going to be coming forward in the near term. And I know you're involved on the Park Avenue sites with Habitat, and that's a good example of what those amendments did allow you to proceed with. So in terms of the discussion, of course, the zoning code is more of the lane or discretion of the Planning Commission and City Council, of course. But just in terms of our subsequent discussion here this evening, one way I would suggest for you to think about it is just giving you more tools in your toolbox to create housing in lower density areas. So how is it implemented? I talked a little bit about external factors. So again, cost of labor, land, materials, financing, those are things that we as the city don't control. You certainly can help support projects financially through some form of subsidy or other means. But those are a lot of things that are outside of our control. So one thing that we do control is our land use regulations, and that's primarily the zoning code. And that's what we do in the planning division. The Planning Commission is the city's planning agency. So they're advisory to the council on these matters. But it's good to bring this stuff before you because, as I mentioned in the beginning, your work very much intersects with these regulations. What you are able to do is directly tied to what the city code allows you to do effectively and the developers you work with. So what we did is we presented to the Planning Commission, I think roughly 20 items, 20 potential solutions in 2 buckets, if you will, for us to explore that could result ultimately in city code amendments. The first bucket, and it's table 2 in the staff report that was included in your packet, are ways to tweak the existing zoning code. I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit, but it's It's basically uses that already exist and making amendments to existing standards that are going to increase the production of these units, particularly ADUs and two-family dwellings, or rather, maybe a better way to say it is just lower barriers and get more opportunity sites to exist in the community. And so for the sake of efficiency and time, what our goal is, we have a study session upcoming with the City Council. What our goal is for the Planning Commission meeting as well as this meeting is generally report to the City Council. You know, we've had 2 advisory boards look at this. This is where they're at with the things they want to pursue. And that way we can clearly communicate to them what is the preference and the desire on the part of these 2 bodies who work in this space. So what I'm going to do for the sake of efficiency, on the tables that Michelle put together, shout out to Michelle, is to, she put the Planning Commission feedback directly on the slide. And hopefully it was represented that way in your staff report as well. And then we also ordered these from a sequence standpoint to kind of describe what these things are in the order that the ones that Planning Commission supported. There was some maybes, so they were a little on the fence or not sure about. And then the no or opposed to these changes. So I'm going to present these to you in kind of slide by slide in these buckets. We don't need to discuss every single one, but rather what I'm looking for from you is just an affirmative that either A, all these items on this list look good. I kind of agree with the Planning Commission position on these things, or we don't. Or if you want to pull out individual ones for me to talk about them and kind of explain what they are, I'm happy to do that too. I will read them off here just on the slide by slide, but it's ADU owner occupancy requirement. I think of all these kind of more land use regulations, setbacks, bulk standards, those kinds of things, the owner occupancy one I think is the one that veers most strongly into the purview of the HRA, I would say. Then the ADU proportionate size, so that just deals with how big the ADU can be compared to its associated dwelling. ADU setbacks, both rear yard and number 3 and front yard setbacks, and then two-family dwellings allow them in our R3 district, which is a townhome district, medium density district. So the Planning Commission supported all of these. Just kind of looking at you all to see if you would also provide an affirmative recommendation on this group of on these 5 group of existing code amendments.
Commissioner Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification. So if we give the thumbs up, that means staff will continue to do work on these, or we will move and we'll move forward with actual amendments coming before City Council?
Yeah, Chair, Commissioner Carter, thank you for that question. I should have clarified a little bit. So one of the components of the Table 2 and the Table 3 amendments, the things that low-hanging fruit maybe isn't the right word for it, but basically there's a grouping of items that could proceed more quickly to code amendments, and there's items, these elements of these uses that we don't currently have in our code. They're going to take more work on staff's part to kind of develop performance standards based on the guidance of the City Council, Planning Commission, and HRA Board. So I view it as there's going to be a group of things where it's very clear what the ask is and what we need to do. We can move quickly on that if that's the desire of the city. And then there's another grouping that's going to take an additional study and work, and we probably would bring that back to you in a subsequent study session.
So this is the first group. This is part of the first.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, procedural foul on my part. We are going to still get some initial feedback from you on some of these things because it will guide some of our research and our work. If you tell us that stacked flats or courtyard apartments are not appropriate for Bloomington to have, and that's the consensus view of the City Council and on down, then that's good direction for us, because then we're not going to place more of our chips and our time in those areas. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question. R3 zoning district, I feel like I should know that, but it's slipping my mind.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Mueller. So the R3 zoning district is not widely applied in the city. It was created in 2015 as a district to create more medium density housing. We've only applied it to one site, or I guess technically 2 sites, but it's the pending a plat and will be developed as townhomes, I think, in the next year, hopefully. So one of the things that we noticed about our code, and again to the point of building in more flexibility, is that we have narrower lists of uses in some of our zoning districts. When the planners constructed these districts, say in 2015, or say even much earlier, it was like, this district is going to be this thing. But what you realize later on is that you are creating some problems in terms of flexibility. You're limiting the flexibility of some of these districts. So two-family dwellings in the context of a townhome development is actually on the lower density side. But we could envision a scenario where separate properties be created within one development, where some of them are two-family dwellings, some of them are townhomes. And maybe this one is just too many planners in the room talking about regulations. But it's just a way to build in more flexibility, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you. So suffice to say that the HRA Board is supportive of these items generally? Okay.
Mua?
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested to see what other ideas we have, especially because the ADUs, I get it. Like, it's a thing we can do. It's low-hanging fruit, you could say. But in terms of creativity, of options, and just out-of-the-box thinking, I think there's definitely more opportunity of what we can do in Bloomington to encourage that. And I've been harping on the home ownership piece of it for as long as I've been here. So, because I do believe, like, there's a time and place to rent, there's a time and place to own, and there's time and place to rent again, and there's time and place to own again. And I feel like the development that we've had over the last 8 years have been purely on the rental side. And what I don't want to do is limit the opportunity for people to move from the rental side to the ownership side and stay in Bloomington. Where sometimes I feel, and this is just anecdotal, but like, people are renting in Bloomington and they want to buy a house, and there's no way for you to even get into a townhome. And so you end up moving down to Farmington or wherever, because that's just where it's cheaper to actually buy something and own it yourself. So yes, I'm supportive of these 5 that we have on there, but I know we have other ideas out there, and I'm interested to see those from what we can do to drive additional development.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Mua. I think you're going to like Table 3 more than Table 2. That's good. And yes, I didn't emphasize that more strongly in my earlier remarks, but I think missing middle housing also presents unique opportunities for home ownership that the current bifurcated structure of all single family and multifamily does not offer. I think there are some, not hurdles, but some questions that do need to be resolved with that. It's easy to split a two-family dwelling right down the middle if you have a shared wall. That's pretty straightforward. You can condo, certain middle housing types, and I don't want to spend too much time on the condo laws. That is what it is, and I don't know how that will interact with middle housing. We can certainly study that a little bit. But one of the other things I'm noticing is that, when you have kind of shared assets in middle housing types, it probably would be more so just the lot and things. It can get a little bit complicated in terms of that association or, less associations are wanting to be created than previous development, except in kind of greenfield, more developments, or in, tall buildings, of course. So the next, thank you for that direction. The next grouping of list was 6 through 11, and this had to do with more two-family dwelling standards. There is one piece on the R3 at the end there, but 6 through 10 deal with two-family dwellings. So I would categorize or characterize these amendments as trying to align our regulations for two-family dwellings more so than what is applicable to single-family. Our code has more strict or stringent standards for two-family dwellings than it has for single-family. Many two-family sites effectively operate very similar to single-family sites. They shouldn't have wildly different standards, and that was part of the discussion in May of 2023. This is kind of a continuation of that. So one is to allow detached garages, and another thing I didn't mention is that one element of middle housing creation is that some of this might be conversions. So you could have a single-family home you decide you want to create it into two separate and distinct units. And so tweaking some of these things makes that conversion opportunity more feasible because a lot of single-family homes in Bloomington don't meet our two-family standards, so it's a non-starter. So some of those are allowing detached garages for two-family dwellings, reducing the setbacks for garages for two-family dwellings, kind of removing a design standard for two-family on corner lots that driveways, if they're facing two local roads, traffic has to be directed one to one street, one to the other. These are kind of, again, things that don't maximize flexibility, and we run into trouble with working with developers on site design. Two-family lot size requirements, this is probably the most significant change in this list, but to slightly reduce the minimum lot size for two-family dwellings as well. I think when this first went through the process, some of the analysis that was done was more focused on side-by-side two-family dwellings as opposed to vertical duplexes. And so we have a lot of, cities we can point to that have lower lot size and we think would work just fine for Bloomington, would create more opportunity sites in Bloomington. And then lastly, on the R3 density range, this one's a little bit wonky, but the density range maximum in our low density area is 12 units per acre. R3 is capped at 8 units per acre. We were contemplating looking at increasing that density range of that district so it more aligns with the low density guide plan. But Planning Commission was iffy on that one, but the rest of them they supported. So same exercise, just same ask as the HRA Board. Generally in alignment with Planning Commission's recommendations of these items, or would like to see anything different?
Any comments or questions? Commissioner Mua.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in number 10. I know we've had a lot of conversations around trees and landscaping and other conversations of the RS1, and so I guess I'm interested to understand what because this is a low impact, is it, how would it move the needle if we remove this piece compared to the environmental impact that it would help support?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Chair Commissioner Mua. So basically, right now, our code requires you to provide 4 trees for a two-family dwelling development. And we have kind of the same process and procedures that you would see for a large multifamily development or a large commercial development. We require them to provide a surety, either in bond or cash, to ensure that the plant material lives for one full growing season. Staff conducts multiple inspections. One of the challenges in this context is that the ownership changes from the start of the project to they're selling some of these units in the form of a two-family dwelling. So if there's issues with compliance, say if some of the material didn't survive the winter or, a hot summer, now you're dealing with a homeowner who had no background or understanding of kind of what the expectations were or what the code requires. So this is another, and forgive me, I didn't touch on this one in my comments, but this is another area where we think it makes sense to align our expectations and requirements just with single-family homes. There's no planting requirement if you're building a new single-family home in Bloomington, and we just think it's effectively in the same grouping of uses. We do think it's appropriate for medium density and above that you provide a planting plan and a robust one at that. But this is, and I agree that it is a low-impact item. I don't think a project is going to not go forward on the basis of our landscaping requirements. But right now, I guess what we're questioning as a staff is it meeting the cost-benefit analysis of the amount of staff time it takes to administer it for the payback? We think there's probably other ways to get some of that.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Any comments on number 11? Just that one's pretty wonky, as I mentioned. Forgive me. Okay. I'm going to keep going forward, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your support there. So this is the table 3. So this is where we get more imaginative. This is where we start thinking more outside the box than what Bloomington currently has. I would say that the Planning Commission was, for the most, a good chunk of these was supportive of. Some they were unsure of what the right direction was. And some of them they were not supportive of. And so what, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're trying to synthesize a feedback for the city council. That's the goal of this session. And I'll run through these again. So townhomes and detached townhomes. In the missing middle graphic that I presented to you, you'll sometimes see these referred to as cottage courts. Effectively what they are is detached townhomes, all on one site around typically a shared courtyard or something along those lines. But allow those in R1 zoning district. And another thing to mention there is in our comp plan in our low density district, it does say that low density townhomes is an appropriate use for our low density residential district. That's in the city's comp plan. So figure out a way to allow that in our R1 zoning district. Townhomes allow detached townhomes. Currently, our townhome standards require that some form of attachment. And again, this is just back to the thing about flexibility. A lot of zoning standards everywhere. Bloomington's not unique in this regard. It's just that housing can be created in more creative and unique ways than how a lot of city zoning regulations are currently structured. So that's really what we're driving at with that one. Missing middle use. So Michelle labeled these as kind of new use considerations. A multiplex. A multiplex use typically is a lower density multifamily or like a quad, or it could be 6 units, it could be 8 units. But what we asked the Planning Commission is whether or not we can establish that as a permitted or conditional use in R3 and R12. Again, those are kind of more our medium density districts. They were supportive of that. Height limits evaluation. Some of these middle housing types are 3 stories tall. And all of our low density areas for the most part are limited to 2 stories in height and 40 feet. And so one of the things that might be necessary to do if all of the decision makers say we need to open up some of these areas to more middle housing types is look in specific areas where we should make some amendments to our height map. And that can be location specific. It's not like every R1 site is subject to the same standards. It's the city has a map and we can make some adjustments there. Live work, this is a little bit of a unique opportunity. I think we created the live work use in 2019, but right now it's only limited to industrial sites. The thought being with that, you're a cabinet maker, you have a maker space, you want to live in your studio effectively. And that made sense at the time. But one of the things we're asking as part of this project is should we have also included our neighborhood business districts as part of that? If you're a shop owner, why couldn't you create a apartment in your space, assuming you met some standards? So that was another thing that the Planning Commission was supportive of. So I'll leave that list up there, and then we'll get into the spicier ones here in a minute.
Commissioner Carter?
Thank you, Chair. I really like number 5. And I think about how many of our neighborhood nodes, neighborhood business districts need to be revitalized. And if this could entice some developers to take on some projects like this, I think it would be very cool. And then also, I am very confused by what a detached townhome is. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, that's just it's a house, which, so I guess I'm just curious if you can just tell me more. But I really truly don't understand that. And I'm totally fine with us not requiring the sharing of a wall.
Yep.
Totally fine with that. I guess I don't know why it's called a detached townhome.
Yeah, Chair, Commissioner Carter. So, I think you're illuminating one of the ongoing jokes or discussion points as staff discusses these different things and kind of looks at the literature of this broad and wide topic. So that there's just so many different names and considerations for the different types, and it's easy to get kind of lost in some of that. I think the idea of just recall that every use has different performance standards for it. And so by creating or allowing effectively detached townhomes, you would be exempting them from kind of the more stringent standards that are applicable to single-family dwellings in some cases.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. Residential sites in R1 are limited to 35% of impervious surface for the most part. That's hardcover. That's what you can put structures, driveways on. If you wanted to create a low-density townhome project, if we have specific standards that are applicable to detached townhomes, or even say they were attached for that matter too, we can effectively create different standards for that as long as we're still managing our stormwater properly. That's just one example. So I think the idea of just calling it out separately is that, and if the city wants to allow multiple principal dwellings on every, single family site, that's an option you can look at. It's coming with that baggage isn't the right word, but all of the standards that we currently have in place for typical development in R1. And we certainly can amend that as part of this process, but that's just kind of the explainer.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Also wanted to add.
Yeah. Sorry, Commissioner Issei.
Yeah, so I just wanted to expand on what Commissioner Mua was kind of mentioning. And so I know you mentioned that with some of these housing types that, there might be opportunity for home ownership, but I can't personally say I'm fully comfortable with all of these because my concern is that we become like other larger cities as they grow where it just becomes a renter's market, right? And so developers come in. The risk that comes with higher density housing is that people just become forever renters. And that's the thing that you don't want because it doesn't allow people to have socioeconomic mobility. And so these are a lot of recommendations. And so I can't really say I'm fully comfortable with it until we understand more information of how this would actually look like. Because, you don't want Bloomington to be like that forever, or become more. I'm just thinking of some other cities on the coast of the United States. So, yeah.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, I will note that I'll share that with Michelle, and I will certainly report that with the council as well. Getting to the next list. So this has to do with more unique or new uses that we currently don't have. So stack flats are similar to an up-down duplex, but they're 3 stories tall, and they typically involve a minimum of 3 units vertical. They can extend horizontally as well to include even more units. But the question that we asked the Planning Commission is whether to establish this use and allow it in our R3 and R12 zoning district. The one thing, this might help the conversation a little bit as I keep pointing to the R3 and R12. These are kind of our medium density districts. As Commissioner Moore and Carter know, serving on the council, any action to rezone a property is a highly discretionary action on the part of the city. It requires public hearings. It's not by right. If you're bringing a development through and it requires rezoning, there is the city has a lot of discretion, and the city attorney can tell you about that as well. But effectively, it gives the city a lot of power or decision-making authority to kind of green-light the project, in effect. So maybe that's something that's helpful just on the back end. So stack flats, courtyard apartments, similar to multifamily use. Again, our matrix of uses right now is very simple. We have townhome, we have multifamily. Again, this is kind of building in layers that may or may not be helpful in these medium density or in some cases even in low density sites if the right site. So courtyard apartments, one of the differentiations there, and not in all cases, but these sometimes include different separate entrances and exits into a courtyard, whereas multifamily obviously usually has a shared lobby and shared egress, staircase, elevators. Courtyard apartments sometimes have their own entrances and exits, but they are all attached and integrated into one structure. So Planning Commission was more neutral on that one, maybe in R3 or RM12. I think looking at pictures is always helpful and to get a sense of that, and we did some of that. Live work up to 2 units, so this is another probably smaller tweak, but attached to the similar concept of allowing it in our neighborhood districts. You're limited to effectively one unit for a live work unit, and so is there some wisdom in expanding that a little bit to increase the number of units? At 3 units, then you're at multifamily and a mixed use scenario, which B4 does allow, B2 does not allow that, or general commercial district. But again, sorry to get into the weeds about the nuance or where the lines are drawn. But so increase the number of live work units. Triplex and fourplex, so same question there. Allow these uses in R1 as either a permitted or conditional use. Planning Commission was not supportive of that. And there's 5 members present, one or two maybe have expressed some neutral or maybe, or I think one may have been supportive of that, but we're just kind of reporting back on the broad level position that they took. So with that, I mean, do you have any guidance that's similar or different from what the Planning Commission put together here? And by the way, if anyone has questions about what triplexes or fourplexes are, I have pictures of that too, if that's helpful. But 3 units, 4 units in one structure, typically.
So I have a question / comment. So basically with number 9 and 10, which they oppose, are saying, like the city of Minneapolis voted that you can have a triplex in a residential neighborhood.
Yep.
So basically what they're saying is they oppose the ability to do this.
In the
unless-
R1.
In an R1 neighborhood. Okay.
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, and that's a good point. And St. Paul went up to 4 units. So these are steps that the two urban or core cities, however you want to refer to them as, are taking. Another point I'll make too about these development types is we haven't talked a lot about the building code, but once you go above 2 units, you get into the triplex or the quad, you now have to sprinkle, and they're subject to the international building code, not the other one. That's a technical term. So there's quite a bit of cost associated with that. So I think, what St. Paul and Minneapolis are trying to learn is, like, where is the break point of these projects to go forward on the tris and the quads in the case of St. Paul. Because of that, the cost of construction is higher.
Other questions, comments?
Well, just looking at these codes and all the different examples. I mean, I always thought of Bloomington as being somewhat landlocked. So I'm trying to figure out where you're building this. Mm-hmm. Are you taking down properties to get these, examples of the different middle income use opportunities?
Yeah, Chair Commissioner Wooten, that's accurate. Yes. So we've had some redevelopment opportunities in the city that's infill where you haven't had to raise the structure. You effectively had enough lot area that you could split a lot. And that has gone forward. We've had others where they demolished the existing home 1 unit and created 2 or 3 units. I can think of a site that's currently under that people are looking at where they're attempting to do that same thing. They're attempting to create a 2-family site and a single-family site in what was a very large single-family site. But so take that same kind of process and consider the inclusion of a triplex or a quad on that. Some cities look at, proximity to transit or higher volume roadways, collector arterial streets, proximity to amenities. Those are useful tools to do that. The only downside of that is that it makes the creation of these uses less likely in some instances. So, I think re-guiding and rezoning might be an even more effective tool. The 2050 comp plan is coming up as well. The city has some areas proactively guided medium density that are along, that have close proximity to neighborhood amenities and transit, and that's something that we might look at as part of our 2050 process as well. But that's another way to kind of get at this, wanting to create some of these units, is to create more medium density sites.
Is there been any discussion as part of these code evolvements of the adverse effects of assessments and increased property values being adversely affected?
Yeah, Chair Commissioner Wooten, I did hear that during the zoning amendments process in May of 2023. I will say that. Some residents expressed concern that if you're doing new construction near their existing homes, that will, maybe not in the near term, but in the long term, have inflationary or raise the costs or assessed values of their properties and how it translates to costs of living. So that is something we've heard. I can't say it's been a loud drumbeat on that, but I think it's not an unfair thing to talk about, for sure.
And then my last question along that same plane, and I'm not sure if it's relevant, is capital infrastructure improvements. Have that also been a part of the code improvement?
Thank you. I'm so glad you asked that question because it stimulates my thinking on something I meant to bring up about why middle housing adds a lot of value. So because we're not looking at specific locations, infrastructure is always usually a location-specific or site-specific question. We have sites, and as the council members know, or the commissioner members know, certainly on council, we have some sewer capacity constraints in certain parts of the city, and so that can always be something that we have to look at. We do have to manage stormwater. So one of the concerns on our water resource staff is that a lot of the pipes that serve our local roads are not sized to take on medium and higher density development. So that certainly has to be part of the equation, and could be something that we need to look at. But back to my moment of excitement, there is one thing that cities need to think about as why middle housing types are also of value is that all the infrastructure is in place already. So the streets, the pipes. So you think about it from a sustainability at a macro level of, trying to increase some of your infill development and some of your density in areas where there's already public infrastructure. Rebuilding all this new pipe and roads and things, eventually as Bloomington, is starting to get to that age as a community, it's expensive, and the more users you can put on the system on a given asset or a facility, the better in terms of replacement cost per user. The lower density communities that are being developed, I used to work for one, and when they eventually have to reconstruct these roads or pipes, and they're as low density as they are, I think some of the residents of those areas are going to have a lot of sticker shock of how much it costs to maintain these public assets. So missing middle housing is good from a sustainability standpoint. It's also good from a utilization of existing infrastructure standpoint. But you do have to manage stormwater. That is an issue.
Commissioner Issei?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I definitely do see the concerns that the Planning Commission has with 9 and 10, and I'm inclined to agree with them. And we can think about the pros that come with middle housing, but I think a lot of the cons, like you were mentioning, especially long-term, is kind of concerning. You just don't want, not only, like I was mentioning, not only do you not want people to be able to get home ownership, but you also don't want the current residents to be priced out of their neighborhoods and then be forced to move further out. And so I just really wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you. Commissioner Moore?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment on number 7 and number 8, the courtyard apartments. I am particularly interested in courtyard apartments. Last year, I believe, last summer it was, I was down in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I graduated from undergrad, and I was walking around, and all of a sudden, walking through a neighborhood, all of a sudden there was a courtyard apartment set up, and I thought that was so cool. And it fit right into the neighborhood. It was very small, very quaint, and it felt like just an extension of the neighborhood. And then also in South Minneapolis, same thing, walking around, and all of a sudden there was a courtyard apartment set up, and it was just super cool to see that you could fit, 4, 5, 6 dwelling units within that, and it didn't feel like it was big and ominous and obstructing the neighborhood. So I'm particularly interested in courtyard apartments. Number 8, I am supportive of number 8 as well. Growing up, for 10 years, that's where my family lived. My parents bought a store to run and operate as their business, and instead of paying 2 mortgages, they paid 1 mortgage and moved us all upstairs into the apartment. It was smaller, granted, but it allowed them to actually run a business, have their family within there. We could all help after school, before school, and that was a very formative time in my life, but I don't think it would have been possible for them to actually own their own business without having that opportunity and option to actually live above their store business. And so I would love to see what we can do to support this in neighborhood business districts and allow owner-operators to live above their businesses and reduce their costs of what they have in their everyday life. So,
Go ahead, Commissioner Wooten.
That same spirit and train of thought. I mean, the thing that came to my mind when you said that was repurpose some of the buildings that we have right now that are vacant. Former fire stations, storefronts, other, utilitarian, types of establishments which have been around a long time and no longer being utilized by anybody, is a perfect example of being able to do something like that. And you're right, it maintains the character of the neighborhood and brings a whole different sense about family, because that can also be an extremely good gathering place. I have where I am off of Old Shakopee Road and Bloomington Ferry Road, they have a storefront there, and then within the past year, we've had a couple of new businesses that have come up into play. And one business that came in just recently, in the last couple of months, is I don't know how to term it, but it's a facility that hosts child and adult activities for parties and events. And I actually walked in and it was bright, shiny. I mean, nobody can live there, but it's bright, shiny, luminous, and it fits in the neighborhood because we have quite a few developments around, townhome developments around, kids around, right around the corner from a school, right next door to a business which is geared towards kids, next door to a barbershop, next door to a pizza place, just a perfect gathering spot, and eventually going to be the same location spot that Pig Ate My Pizza is going to open up in. So I'm not plugging Pig Ate My Pizza, but I'm just saying.
We get a lot of questions.
And Pig Ate My Pizza is basically an old gas station / store. So, it's already coded, already there. Unique opportunities to really take advantage and infrastructure already in place, capital infrastructure is already in place, those kinds of things. So I would concur with Commissioner Miles that, that 8 is very good. I would definitely approve of something like that.
I also want to add my support to number 8 of the live and work units. And I know nearby suburb either has built or is planning on building even a property that is business in the front and living in the back. So I believe this is something we can get creative with and explore, and could be something, more unique about Bloomington.
It's really helpful. Thank you for this feedback. The only quick response I wanted to make to Commissioner Mua's comments about the courtyard apartments is, and there's a little bit of layers or there's nuance in what we're presenting to you here. The Planning Commission, if I'm remembering correctly, actually was more supportive of RM12. It was the R3 piece that's where more of the maybe is what's being reflected there. And so I think just overall, one of the lessons I'm learning through these conversations, and just with how limited it's been of these application of these more medium density districts so far, is that I think we have lessons that we can learn and steps in terms of supporting or proceeding through some of these rezonings to these medium density districts and what they could look like, because they would be different and unique than to what we have currently, I would say. So I'm going to write down more affirmative support behind number 8, and I might put just a star next to number 7 as just that it was discussed as well, if that's okay.
Yes.
Next step, so that's kind of the type 2 bucket. There's other missing middle housing types in name that we didn't specifically cover tonight, but I think the majority of the types were covered through these questions. And so as I mentioned, responded to Commissioner Carter's question earlier in terms of what's next. Many of these things we know what the solution is and could act relatively quickly, and that's feedback we will be seeking from council if they want this to be one large bulk ordinance, or if we should move more rapidly on the things that are more clearly in front of us. That's direction we will seek from them. But just to give you a sense of kind of the process, so we're scheduled to go to the City Council on November the 18th. We appreciate your feedback tonight. We'll report that along with the Planning Commission feedback. And we'll get their feedback on these things. And then at some point, we'll work with Sarah and the HRA staff to talk about what it would look like to bring back some additional information to you at some point, whether it be in a study session format or some other interaction. I know on policy efforts passed, and that the HRA on one or two occasions has offered kind of a formal declaration or letter of some kind related to planning commission work plan projects. So that's certainly something that we can take your feedback and can discuss with HRA staff as well. Something that could happen in the future. So with that, I appreciate your feedback and happy to take any outstanding questions you might have.
Commissioner Mua.
Thank you, Chair. I have one kind of outstanding question just on the developer piece. You mentioned that there hasn't been significant interest in this particular piece. All the options we've looked at are just zoning, right? So not subsidy driven. What kind of feedback have you gotten from developers? Like, are the changes we're making, are those enough to drive in the market build out here with that? Or like, is this an initial step and we're going to have to start looking at subsidy options, which I'm not particularly super interested in at this point, but what's the developer feel right now for these types of missing middle options?
Chair Commissioner Mua. So just speaking for myself in the planning division, I think it's hard to predict how much regulatory changes will stimulate development activity because it's so closely tied to those external forces. Who are the roster of developers doing this work? Are you paying 7% interest rates on your construction loan? Where is land available? So all of those things are difficult to figure out. I guess the way I've been framing it since the process in May of 2023 is we need to figure out more ways to be flexible and get out of the way and then kind of see what happens. Mm-hmm. And I would have liked to seen things move a little bit quicker since we made some of those adjustments and changes last year. But frankly, I almost think to a degree it's not almost fair to the changes we did make, looking at the borrowing and the financial environment since then. Not to mention just building more developer interest and just more education, frankly. I mean, we haven't got out on a dedicated education campaign. Some folks we discussed with it might not be thrilled. Who knows? But the point is that we did get some calls and early calls. So I question or I hesitate to know how much the average Bloomington resident is kind of cognizant of some of the potential redevelopment opportunities that might exist on their property. And additional adjustments may offer even more of those. But I guess I'm heartened to see that a few separate two-family dwelling developments and lot splits are in the works to create, more housing. And these things do take time. I mean, that's one of the things I've learned through this process is that it can take 6 to 9 months to put a deal together, unless you're a very well-resourced developer. And very well-resourced developers are in the multifamily space or the commercial space or other spaces other than this arena. And so that's kind of one of the things is that really drives that a little bit of patience is needed. And Glen, the planning manager, he refers to it as rapid prototyping. It's kind of another way of reframing incrementalism to a degree is like you have to keep making some tweaks and adjustments with the lessons you're learning. Some of this goes beyond rapid prototyping, obviously. But I think we're still enthusiastic and think that it offers the city a great opportunity. The Planning Commission, Vice Chair Cookdon asked that same question, that we as a staff are putting a lot of time and effort into studying this, and the return is not, clearly on the table yet. So he, for discussion purposes, he did raise the question of, are we directing our resources in the wrong direction? And I think the consensus from that discussion, both at staff and PC member, was that no, we need to keep going forward. Okay. So thank you. Sorry, got a little long there.
That's okay. Administrator Abe.
Yeah, I would just like to add, I think as Nick identified, cost is a really significant barrier to missing middle housing, but and every little bit helps. So hopefully some of these will help to address various barriers, including cost. And then we're in a fortunate situation to have the Affordable Homeownership Program, which does have the grant from Minnesota Housing, which also will support single family and some missing middle type development with subsidy over the next few years. So I do think with all of these changes in tandem together, hopefully that will have some impact, some positive impact in the missing middle housing landscape in the next few years.
Any other questions, comments? No. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay. We have some updates from Administrator.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of quick updates for you all. I wanted to let you know that we have a couple of RFPs either currently posted or about to be posted, so you might see those. One is for ARPA funding. We have some funding remaining that needs to be committed by the end of the year, so that one is available now for homelessness prevention services. You'll see that on our website. We also are doing this year an RFP for CDBG social services, and so that is a new process that's in line with our procurement, and you can expect to see that posted sometime in the next month or so here. And then I wanted to just note a couple of things about upcoming meetings for you all. So our next meeting is scheduled for November 26th, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So could I just get like head nods confirmation that people will be able to make that? I want to make sure we have quorum. Yep. Okay. And then the next one is actually currently scheduled. We have one meeting in December 17th. So instead of doing the joint meeting with the Planning Commission in November, we actually shifted that to December. So we're looking at that date for a joint meeting. It's the regular meeting date of the HRA, so no additional meeting for you to attend in that space. But we were considering adding a meeting on December 10th, and that would be for two main purposes. One would be to approve that ARPA funding, and another would be potentially a joint meeting with the council around LAHA funding. So could I, same thing, get kind of nods on if those dates work for folks? Okay. Okay, great. Then I think we are good to go for our next couple of meetings here.
All right. That's the end of our agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn the Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 HRA Board meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Carter. Second by Doblinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Meeting adjourned.